University is a big step, and without the right information, it can seem pretty scary. My name's Kirsten Leckie, a business student at Ulster University. In this series, I investigate some of the biggest questions students have when researching their university options. Join me as I explore everything from perfecting your UCAS application, surviving the transition from school, and getting your head around student finance. In this episode, I want to find out all the costs involved in going to university, from tuition fees and accommodation costs to having a student social life. I'm meeting two student finance experts to find out how students can pay for uni, what support is available, and their advice on how to budget. For many students considering university, the issue of fees and finance can be confusing and off-putting. Words such as loans and student debt can make you think it's unaffordable. What's even more confusing is that tuition fees vary depending on where you study. For example, if you choose to study here in Northern Ireland, you'll pay considerably less than anywhere else in the UK. Across the water, universities charge £9,250 per year. Bear in mind, these costs don't include your accommodation, travel, food, or utility bills. So with so many potential outgoings, how can the average student afford to go to university? I'm off to meet Elaine Reid from Student Finance NI, one of the main methods used to pay for university. So thank you so much, Elaine, for meeting me today. So I guess a main question that most students have is if they can afford university. There's a lot of questions and a lot of stress around that. So how can the average student afford to go to university?
First of all, the tuition fee, you can apply for a tuition fee loan which covers then their tuition fees every year at their course, and that is paid to the university from the student loans company. They can also apply for a maintenance loan, which is then money paid into their account for them to live on, accommodation, books, costs like that. Depending on the household income, they can then apply for a maintenance grant.
So to strip it right back, Elaine, what's the difference between a maintenance loan and a maintenance grant?
Well, the maintenance loan is a loan that at the end of your university course you start to pay back. A maintenance grant, you don't pay it back. It's all dependent on income, on household income.
So Elaine, someone that works for student finance, what's one thing you wish students knew more about regarding student finance?
I suppose our main thing is too many students leave it too late. They apply maybe in August, they think at the start of August, oh, I'm for university. That's too late to apply for student finance, and you could be talking 4 to 6 weeks. So you could have started your course before you get any money, and that's not ideal for a student.
So my final question for you, Elaine, whenever people or students avail of a student loan or a maintenance grant or anything like that there, when does them payments need to be paid back?
They do start to pay them back in the April after they graduate, but at the minute the amount is you have to be earning in around over 19,000 when you start paying that back.
So for example, if someone doesn't meet that threshold, what happens to that money?
Well, if you don't ever meet the threshold, then the debt is written off after 25 years. But you would like to think if you went to university you would be getting a fairly decent job.
So Elaine, that's all my questions for you. I hope we've relieved a little bit of stress and confusion from some students. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
I guess the main thing I took from my chat with Elaine was the huge number of applicants student finance have every year. So getting your own application started before the summer months is so important. I'm now going to find out what additional support and advice Ulster can offer from Kathy Quillman, Student Money Coordinator at the university. Hi Kathy, thank you so much for joining us today.
No problem.
What help or support can students receive in addition to their student finance?
Okay, so there's a range of different support available, some directly from ourselves and then some external as well. If a student is based in the UK, so they're a home student, they can apply to us for the Financial Support Fund. It's really quick, simple, easy to pull your information together, put in an application form. Most students find they can do it in less than an hour, and it's information that they already have available and they already know. If they are an EU, ROI or international student, it's very similar, it's just that it's called a hardship fund. We take that information, we put it through a quick assessment, a few calculations, and hopefully if the student meets all the criteria, we can then give them an award, and fortunately it's an award that they don't need to pay back. So we do sort of hope that students hopefully don't need it first thing as soon as they begin September. Hopefully it's just in a real sort of crisis, it's a safety net that you can come to later in the year.
So I guess another question we could touch on and maybe ask is, for example, say if a student's got their first student loan, or they're a couple of months in, they've been given their second payment, what are the most common money mistakes a student makes when they arrive at university?
Okay, so the first sort of big one would be not kind of realising how far their money does or doesn't go. A lot of students assume that student finance magically gives you the correct amount of money that you need to live on for a year, and don't necessarily realise that actually what you're given might not cover everything. For some students it doesn't even cover their cost of their accommodation. So it's looking at how far that money needs to go and what are the priority things you need to be using it on. So whether that is your accommodation payments to cover you for that semester, or having money set aside for travel for that semester, or looking at what modules you're doing and what textbooks you're going to need for that semester. The next thing then is just some students have this real expectation of what university life is going to be like. They're finally have their own money to spend by themselves. They maybe are out of their own family home for the first time, and you can just go a bit mad. I went out with my first student loan and bought a coat for £100, and it was the biggest indulgence I've ever done in my whole life, and by the time at the end of the first semester I was completely dreading it because I was going, why did I buy this coat? It was amazing when I got it, but now I'm starving. And it's making those kind of big, oh my god, I've got money, I need to spend it choices. And it's just remember that money has to last you a long enough time. So what could be a really, really great first month at university could lead to miserable the rest few months of university.
From a current student's perspective, if a student does find themselves in financial difficulty, would things such as a credit card or loans or anything like that, overdrafts, would that be a good idea?
We would say all students should get a student overdraft. That's definitely, just every student should do it. Student overdrafts are usually a zero interest rate and stay zero interest rate for up to 1 year after you graduate. So it's the absolute best form of lending that a student can have. If a student waits, say, until 6 months into their degree and they reach financial difficulty and ask for an overdraft, the bank won't give it to them. You need to be getting the overdraft at the very beginning when you've just put your funding into your account. There's lots of money there and the bank thinks you're great. That's the point at which you ask for an overdraft. So we say get that in September.
So my final question then for you, Cathy, is what advice would you give to a student considering coming to university next September?
So firstly, I would say make sure you apply for any funding early. Get your application as early as possible. They've obviously thousands of students to process and they can't guarantee that you will get your payment in September as you would expect if your application isn't in nice and early. The next thing I would say is to disclose really early if you need any extra help or support. If you've got any extra support when you were in school, say for mental health needs, a disability, dyslexia, anything like that, let us know as soon as you can. Your school isn't going to pass over that information. We don't know that unless you come and tell us, and you need to tell us as soon as you can so we can start putting support in place. The next thing I would say is to start looking at how you're going to afford university. If you can get a part-time job even this early before you're starting, give yourself a few months that you can start putting aside money. You don't know what funding you're going to get at this stage, so it's nice to have a safety net already in place, have some money already set aside. It means then if the funding you get isn't as much as you expected, you've some money there as a backup, or if the money is exactly what you expected, you've some money there for a rainy day. But start early, don't wait till September to suddenly try and work it all out.
That's all I have to ask you, so thank you so much for your time.
No problem.
So I guess my biggest takeaway from my conversation with Cathy is to start thinking like a student now. So considering your accommodation, your food bills, things like that should all be thought of and considered before you join university. As well as that, there is the option there to take out your student overdraft with your local bank, and having that there as a safety net should you need it, and using that to your advantage. The cost of university will continue to be a big factor for most students. After chatting to Elaine and Kathy, I've made it seem less scary and less confusing. Actually, university is really affordable once you get your head around student finance and the support available. The biggest thing I've learned is a huge number of students use student finance to pay for their university degree. You also don't have to pay any fees until you graduate and are earning over a certain amount. A tuition fee loan from student finance makes this possible. Although fees in finance may seem daunting at first, it should never be a barrier to pursuing a university education.